And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight, Valentina Alasem. Valentina received her bachelor's in biology from Virginia Tech and is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Nevada, Reno in ecology, evolution, and conservation biology. She is interested in how animals cope with changes that humans make to our environment. Her dissertation research focuses on the effects of urbanization and specifically light pollution on birds. So we'll hear more about that today. And as it happens, it is also World Migratory Bird Day this weekend on May 14th. And the theme is Dim the Lights for Birds at Night. So this is a great tie into that. So in this field, Valentina also hopes to work towards bridging the gap between humans and their environments and increasing diversity in STEM education. So we are all for that as well. So Valentina, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I'll have you go ahead and take it away from here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you guys all for tuning in from, it looks like all over. I'm just talking a little bit about light pollution as a whole and what it's doing to, on a really broad scale, to whole ecosystems of birds. And then I'm going to scale in really small and talk about the effects of light pollution on individual birds and what it's doing to like each individual bird, which is kind of what I specialize in. But first, I think light pollution is something that we've all experienced in some shape or form. But I want to know, what do you guys think is light pollution? Where do you think it comes from? So if you want, you can throw in the chat now, like, what are some examples of places that you think are contributing to light pollution? Maybe, oh, we're coming people from all over. So what in your neighborhood is, you think, the biggest sources? I'm seeing buildings, yep, office buildings. Office buildings, like the ones in this picture, are definitely one of the big ones. Streetlights, and I think, oh, Las Vegas, yep. If you've ever been to Las Vegas, I think one individual casino probably emits more light pollution than some whole cities. And then also like airports, which are sometimes really remote, where there otherwise wouldn't need to be, is a big one. Outdoor lights, yeah, from your court, house lights. And I think, as much as we really want to do our part individually with our own houses, some of the biggest ones are like our workplaces, right? Because there are these huge buildings and they leave the lights all on all night just to feel safer. Yeah, malls. Somebody said that their neighbor has floodlights all night to scare away raccoons. It's a big one. Cool, this is great. So imagine how annoying all these things are for us. Imagine what it's like for our birds, right? Birds are, I think, particularly vulnerable to light pollution compared to other animals for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you've ever gone birding in the city, which I'm sure a lot of you have, you'd be surprised how many species we can actually find living with us in the city. There's so much bird diversity that are exposed to light pollution all the time. And even the ones that don't live with us, who are just using cities as migratory stops, will be exposed to light pollution during their journeys. Second, a lot of birds are diurnal. So unlike a lot of mammals who sleep at night, or sorry, who sleep during the day and are awake at night, birds, a lot of species of birds are diurnal. So they're trying to sleep just like us at night. And so light pollution for birds in that way is really disruptive. And then finally, like this little guy in the upper left here, a lot of these birds nest straight out in the open. So there are some cavity nesting birds who get to kind of hide away from the light and maybe sleep in a hole in a tree, but a lot of birds just have their nests right out in the open, and so there's no barrier between them and all these city lights. And then it's not just birds that I'm worried about living in the city, it's also outside of the city. So light, as opposed to other kinds of pollution, is actually really good at getting out of the city and reaching natural areas. So there's been a lot of look into whether we can detect light pollution in national parks and conservation areas, and we can. There's also been some studies showing that we can see light pollution even deep under the sea. So like the sea floor is still experiencing some light pollution, which is kind of crazy to me. But I'll also say a lot of the time when I'm talking about the negative effects of light pollution, I'm talking about really dim levels of light. So this is the picture of Lake Tahoe on the left and kind of outside of Vegas on the right. And this is kind of light pollution I'm talking about. So it's pretty dim. It's more likely that birds are experiencing dim light at night than it is to be experiencing something really bright, like living directly under the Luxor in Vegas. Although not impossible, it does happen. I think dim light is kind of what my focus is. And so for part one, I'm going to be talking about light pollution on a global scale. So how is this affecting birds all over the world who are trying to get around and live their lives? Well, some of the first evidence that light was a problem for birds actually came as early as the 1900s from observations at lighthouses. So people that would hang out at these lighthouses and monitor at the sea, they would notice these birds coming in night after night after night. This attraction to light that we saw to lighthouses is the same phenomenon we see with attraction to buildings. And so maybe you guys have heard about this. There's been a lot of things in the news about bird collisions, big giant masses of migratory birds running into buildings. So it's been a big problem and something that us bird conservationists are really interested in working on. And there was this really cool study that came out just last year that showed a lot of these collisions happen at night. And if we just reduce the lights coming out of those buildings by 50%, so not even turning them all off, but just reducing them by 50%, we get 11 times less bird collisions, which is pretty crazy because some people just think the glass is like transparent and it's that the birds can't see it and they think they're running right into it. They think it's part of nature. But in reality, a lot of the bird collisions are caused by artificial light at night and this light coming through that's attracting them to the buildings. And this attraction of, again, birds to light, I think was exemplified really well by this scientist named Aaron Rodriguez. And I found this video on Twitter. It's really cool. So I'm going to try and show it to you now. Hopefully the internet is going to work for me here. So he put loggers on these Cory shearwaters, and they are seabirds that nest inland on the Canary Islands. And once the babies hatch, they fly out towards the ocean. So what I'm showing you here is, you can see my mouse, I assume. So up here, where all these lines are originating from, are the nesting site. And these little colored things are the birds flying out towards the ocean. So this whole upper right side is the land, and this lower left side is the ocean, where it's really dark. And what's really cool about this is that you can see really clearly these birds trying to get out to the ocean, but instead just running right into these little light patches. So all of these little light blue areas are light pollution areas. That one just bounces around in there for a while. This one almost makes it out and then changes its mind. So it's a really cool example that light is really attractive for birds, and it's causing a lot of issues with orientation. And so not only is it an issue for these babies that are flying for the first time out of the nest, but for migratory species. So, and it's, like Serena said, migratory weekend. So a good time to talk about this. But as you can imagine, this being disoriented and confused by light can be a huge problem for migratory birds. Many birds travel thousands of miles at a time, which takes so much energy. And when you get a little bit off course, that can be a disaster. So I want you all to imagine like taking a road trip across the country. You're trying to go from San Francisco to Miami for the summer and realizing when you get there, you're accidentally in New York, right? It can be really challenging. And now imagine doing all that on foot, right? Like you've used your body to get there and now you're in the wrong place. It can be a huge waste of energy for these birds. And there's a lot of really cool advancements in technology that are showing us exactly where birds are going. And that lets us, it lets us see for ourselves which species are exposed to light pollution at what times. So this is a really cool study that came out a couple years ago. And on the left here, this is a weather radar station. And I'm no meteorologist, so it's all magic to me, but these giant stations are able to detect using radar birds that fly by. So they use speed. And so things that are flying really fast, the radar will detect as a plane. And if it's going too slow, they know it's an insect. But if it's just right, if it's the speed of a bird, we can tell that it's a bird. And so they use that data to show where birds are migrating at what times. And you can overlay that with satellite data of light pollution to see which species are going to be exposed to light pollution in what places. And so we can try to fix those problems with this really cool technology. And then another really cool thing that's going on right now, if you were here for the last talk, you might know a little bit more about this, because I think the last talk here was about MODIS. This is a collaboration between a lot of different countries where researchers who are tracking birds will share their data. So if a scientist puts a little radio tag on a bird in South America, and then it shows up in Canada, and maybe stops in North America and on the east coast of the US on the way, we can get all that data and we can get a really good look at where birds are going and why. And so all of this is really cool and gives us insight into which species we really need to worry about when it comes to light pollution. So now that we've talked about these big scale patterns and what we see birds are struggling with light pollution, I'm going to try and scale down a little bit and talk about the effects of light pollution on different species living in different kinds of environments. So first, what about different species? What are the birds actually seeing? And is it the same for a robin in my backyard and an owl living in the tree? Well, visual systems are really diverse. For example, humans ourselves, we have three photoreceptors for color vision that are the red ones. They detect red, blue, and yellow, and that's why we see the rainbow, right? Well, birds have this whole extra photoreceptor that sees UV. And that's really cool because it doesn't just add like a little bit of color on the end of the rainbow that we don't see. It actually adds a whole dimension when you combine it with all these colors, so that birds see a whole spectrum of things we can't even imagine. And so this is like just to give you an example, an artist's representation of what a black and yellow bird might look like to other birds who have UV vision. And then same down at the bottom, a picture of what these really well camouflaged eggs might look like for birds. They're really not camouflaged at all. And it turns out that bird vision is actually really diverse. Depending on where they live, what they eat, different species have really different vision. For example, if you think about hummingbirds, hummingbirds are really important pollinators. They like to drink the nectar of these bright red flowers. And so hummingbird species often have better vision in the red spectra. They're better at detecting red hues than they are blues because of this interaction between the flowers, and they need to see them to figure out which flowers they want to eat and pollinate. On the contrary, this is research that my friend Hannah does in Hawaii, and she studies seabirds and found that birds that dive deeper into are less sensitive to reds and more sensitive to blues, and less sensitive to UV light. So as light comes into the water, it will filter certain hues. And so for birds that need to dive deeper, their vision is kind of fine-tuned to be really good in deep water levels, so they can find fish really deep in the ocean. And that's why they're better at detecting blue light versus things that dive more shallow. They don't need to have vision. They're actually okay at seeing red light. And so even within a group such as seabirds, there's this diversity in the kind of vision that we have. And then there's nocturnal birds, who are, of course, specialized for nighttime vision and are much more sensitive to dim levels of light than other birds and us. So what looks dark to us might actually be pretty bright for an owl. This is a picture of a very cute tawny owl, and they have 100 times more sensitive, they're 100 times more sensitive to light than our regular rock doves, which is a lot, right? And then this is one of my favorites. This is a cave-dwelling oilbird. And I'm not so sure how much light pollution these guys are exposed to if they live in caves, but theoretically, just to give you an example, these guys are 150 times more sensitive to light than even our owl that I just showed you before, which is 400 times more sensitive than humans are. So this is again why I'm talking about light pollution at really dim levels, because what we think is kind of a negligible amount of light that maybe is, you know, hardly anything out there, it's not that bright at all, can actually be really bright for some of these sensitive birds. And there's been some studies on burrowing owls, like I'm showing you here, which show that owls choose, if given a preference, they will choose to hang out more near the light sources, they sleep near the light sources, and they actually start eating more of the insects that will be attracted to light. They'll shift their diet to eat more of those things when light is around. So for these nocturnal birds, it's also a really big problem. So I've talked about how different species all have different vision and so might perceive light pollution differently. But for the second part of this question, I want to talk about how does light pollution itself look different in different environments. The environment itself can act as a sort of filter, which will change the way light pollution looks in that habitat. So you can think about how light might look different coming through a forest canopy like this. Weather can actually have a huge effect in this regard. So this is a picture of Berlin, Germany on a snowy night. And some researchers measured the light pollution in the city and found that when it snowed and when it was cloudy, the levels of light pollution were actually 1,000 times brighter than otherwise when there's no snow and there's no clouds, which is kind of crazy because that is a huge difference just from a weather change overnight. And the same kind of thing goes for under the sea. So remember I said before, light pollution can even reach the ocean floor. And studies are showing that, again, if it's cloudy, even more light pollution will reach there. So the levels of light pollution we put outside, we might need to adjust based on the weather, based on the place that we are and what the environment looks like. But you might be wondering why I'm talking about the sea. This is a bird talk, right? Well, a lot of aquatic organisms can have really good vision. And so again, what's bright for us, what's not bright for us might still be bright for under the sea organisms. For example, there's a crustacean that can migrate 80 meters below the ocean up to the top of the surface just based on levels of moon brightness. So things that are really dim that like we wouldn't even consider. The brightness of the moon is like way lower than the brightness of artificial lights. And yeah, why am I talking about crustaceans? Well, the thing is, it matters what your food is doing, right? So a lot of birds feed on aquatic organisms. And in addition to affecting birds themselves directly, light pollution can affect their food sources and therefore affect the birds that eat those things. There's been a lot of studies showing that if you light up a harbor or sometimes those shipping vessels that have a lot of bright lights, those will attract a lot of birds as well. And it's also a big issue when it comes to birds that eat insects. Different species of insects are attracted to different light. And so if you have a really flexible diet, this is kind of great for birds that eat insects and they've found these lights. They're like, yeah, this is a 24-hour buffet. There's so many insects here. I can just eat all night. But for birds who can't do that, who have diet restrictions, they might actually be at a disadvantage. So if there are any vegetarians out there in the audience, you may know what I'm talking about. Imagine being surrounded by like 200 fast food restaurants, but there's not a lot of options for you there. So depending on the species and the kind of diet they have, they might be able to benefit from these light sources attract their food. But if you don't have a lot of flexibility in your diet, you might be at a disadvantage there. And so again, why am I talking so much about color of the lights and color that birds can see and the color that looks like through their habitats? Well, it's important because, again, different animals will experience light pollution differently. And right now we're transitioning a lot of our lights in the outdoors to LEDs, as opposed to these old-fashioned yellow lights that were a lot softer. LEDs are brighter and a lot whiter. And so it's important to think about how this change in the kind of light we use and the intensity of the light we use will affect different species. Because again, we're concerned, if we're concerned about the birds, we also have to be concerned about their food and how that light is affecting the species that are attracted to them, and then how that scales up in the food web. It can all be a huge chain reaction in ecosystems. And I just want to reiterate that light pollution itself, again, it kind of seems like a really simple issue, but when you think about individual species and where they're living and what they're experiencing, it's important to take that into account when we make decisions about putting lights outside. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in, and that I try to share with people who are putting lights outside and making decisions about the light in our cities. And so that was a lot. I wonder if there are any questions now, but for the next part of the talk, I'm going to scale really inwards now. So I've talked a lot about how light pollution is affecting bird movement and the way they orient, and then a lot about how it affects different species and different habitats. What I actually study myself is how light pollution is affecting individual birds. So in other words, how does this actually work? Why are birds attracted to light? Why are they responding the way that they do? And what's going on in their brain and their eyes? So if you can imagine, this is a bird brain. I'm not an artist, so try really hard. Light detectors exist in the eyes. These are called visual photoreceptors, the same ones that I talked about before. So the same reason we have color vision, that's because of the photoreceptors in the eyes. But we also have photoreceptors deep in the brain, in the hypothalamus, and in the pineal gland, which are just two other parts of the brain. They're not really important, but there's photoreceptors in there too, and these are non-visual photoreceptors. So these are organs that detect light, but they aren't involved with vision. So if you can think about how plants are able to detect light, but they don't have eyes at all, it's kind of the same thing. So it's these other kinds of light detectors that are in the brain themselves. And now I get to tell you one of my favorite fun facts about birds. This pineal gland sits right on top of the brain. And in humans, it's somewhere else. So this is something special to birds, that it sits up here. And you also might know this already, but birds have really thin skulls. So one of the things that allow birds to fly is that they have really thin bones, and they have holes in them, which makes them super lightweight, but also makes their bones kind of transparent. And so the light actually can go straight through that bird's feathers and skull and be sensed by the photoreceptors in this gland. And this is why you don't see birds wearing hats very often, because if they did, they couldn't use this really cool special sensor, and they'd have to like string their necks up really weird to check the light and see what time it is, right? And so when these photoreceptors in the brain detect light, they use it as a cue to tune the whole body's internal clock. So it basically tells the bird and the rest of the body, hey, it's morning now, it's time to get up and sing and find some worms. This clock also controls the cycle of melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us sleep. So we have the same hormone. Some of you might have heard about it. A lot of people take melatonin supplements now to help them sleep. But it's the same clock that that tunes the cycle of melatonin, which goes up at night while we sleep and then goes down during the day. It also affects cycles of behavior. So it controls the timing of when birds wake up and sing in the morning. It lets them know when days are getting longer and it's time to migrate or it's time to breed. This clock is really important for timing all sorts of behavior. And then finally, it also controls a lot of physiological processes. So when I say physiology, I just mean things that are going on in your body. So your heart rate, your metabolic cycle, your blood pressure, stress levels, digestion, all of that stuff that goes on in your body without us knowing it. It's all kind of in a cycle that's timed by this clock, which is timed by the light. So knowing when it's light out and what time it is that way does a lot for our bodies and for the birds' bodies. And light pollution like this really throws off these processes. It's very biologically confusing, if you will. So hopefully that makes sense. And for my research, I study how light pollution throws off this clock and affects the birds' behavior and their physiology. So what I do is I have birds in a cage with this little automated perch. Let me look at their activity 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it spits it out into this computer so I can look at it later. And so the birds are just living their lives in these cages. And when I put light pollution up, this is a graph of kind of something from my research. You'll see there's days on the x-axis here, and the y is how active they are at night. So the first half of this time is showing from this data this is data I collected from just looking at birds hopping on this perch, which is basically how I measure activity. But in the beginning, they're all sleeping because no one's under light pollution. They're just waking up and going to bed normally, and there's not a lot of activity at night. But as soon as I turn on light pollution, the birds are much more active. So they're really awake for a lot of the night and hopping around. And another way to look at this is measuring their circadian rhythms. So circadian rhythm is just a kind of fancy word for saying looking at these cycles of waking up in the morning and going to bed at night, and the pattern of that day by day. And in this case, what I'm showing you here is a very long-term graph. So each row is a day, and it's 24 hours. So all these gray areas are nighttime hours, and then the white area in the middle is daytime, and then the gray is nighttime again. And these black bars represent activity. So you'll see every single day the birds wake up right when the sun comes up and go to sleep right when the sun goes down. Or in this case, it's my fake sun because these are birds I have in the lab with me. And it's the same every day. They have a pretty good rhythm, pretty good consistent circadian rhythm. But as soon as we turn, see that the activities go up, but it's not going up randomly. There's a lot of birds just waking up earlier every single day, consistently every single day. As soon as this light pollution is turned on, they're waking up just a little bit earlier. And then under brighter light, happens even more extreme. You'll see the birds are waking up way earlier. And so it's not just that the birds are kind of getting bad sleep and waking up, but it's throwing off this clock. And it's changing the timing of that clock because they think that this light pollution is sunlight. And so their bodies are responding to it as if it's the morning and as if it's time to go. But in reality, it's just a casino flashing its lights at its customers, right? And the reason I'm interested in looking at this is because, like I said before, this clock is linked to a lot of different things in the body. Partly behavior, which is explains a lot of those things I've talked about in the beginning. So explains a lot of things we see in the birds in the wild. But also disrupting the clock causes a lot of health problems. This clock is linked to, again, our blood pressure, our metabolism, our stress levels. And I say we because it's the same exact thing that happens in humans. There's been a lot of studies showing that people who work the night shift and are under light all the time throughout the night are at higher risk for things like cardiovascular disease, heart disease, metabolic disorders, cancer, depression. And we don't know too much about what the link is here, but the bottom of I guess the one thing that we do know is that it's really complicated, but the effect of light on our bodies is really strong. And it's not just night shift workers. So living in Reno, this is kind of what my house looks like at night. There's like a giant floodlight right outside for no reason at all. And again, it's kind of nice because at least I can shut my blinds, but the birds aren't so lucky. All right, so for this last bit, I want to talk about what we can actually do to help this problem. A lot of the negative effects, but there's a lot of positive things that we can do. I think one of my favorite things about studying light pollution is that the solutions seem pretty obvious to me. Their lights are really easy to turn off, and it's actually cheaper to turn them off. So it's kind of great. It's a lot easier than like cleaning up an oil spill. The first thing that we can do is change the color of the light. So like I said before, we are changing a lot of our lights outside to LEDs, which are usually brighter and bluer, but they also come in a whole bunch of different colors. So the next time you're out buying lights for your porch, you can buy these warmer color temperature lights or these cooler ones. You can kind of pick. And this is another thing that I did as part of my PhD. I looked at these different shades of lights to see if it would change the effect that I saw in my birds. So same kind of thing, I just like exposed them to different kinds of light pollution. And I found that the warmer lights actually were a huge help. The birds didn't seem to wake up much at all under the warmer light compared to these whiter lights. And I measured stress in the birds. I do that by measuring their hormone levels. And I found that kind of the same thing. If we use the yellower, softer lights, it doesn't affect their stress levels nearly the same way as these cooler lights. So that was just looking at different shades that are actually pretty similar. Like if you look at these two lamps, they look pretty much the same to you and I, right? But that's why it's important to think about different visual systems and what a small change for us can actually be a big thing for something else. So another solution that is pretty easy is just redirecting the light, making sure the light is going where we want it to go and not anywhere else. So one way to do that is just using lamp covers. A lot of streetlights back in the day were just these giant balls of light that 50% of the light went down at the street and 50% went up into the sky, right into all our birds' eyes. But I think the word has gotten out that it's pretty easy to just have a lamp that's a little more shaded and you can direct light right where you want it. So again, if we're thinking about our own homes, this could mean just having a porch light that's pointing straight down at your front door so you can see who's there, but not out into your whole front lawn. There's also some creative ideas like having vegetation barriers around streets. So if we have to have streetlights in order to drive, we could maybe plant more trees around the streets so that, again, the light isn't leaking out of where we want it into natural areas. We can create kind of barriers around that. And then finally, my favorite, using curtains. And this is, again, just like so easy, such a simple idea. And it's actually better for you and I, and for the birds, because they don't get our light pollution when we're awake, and then we don't get the street lights when we're asleep. Curtains can be really easy and a really good thing to pitch to your maybe supervisors or people in charge of your workplaces who have those lights on all night, to just have curtains so that people can stay there and work as long as they need to, but the light isn't going anywhere else. Oh yeah, and remember that study I showed you before. how if we just reduce building light by 50%, we can save so many birds just directly running into the buildings. So forget all these other effects, these indirect effects of like, you know, changing their behavior and their stress and all that stuff. But like, even just running into the building is like a really direct way that birds are affected by light pollution. That's pretty easy to solve. And then obviously, I think the best solution is to remove light pollution where we don't need it. And it's more cost effective for us if we can take down a few street lamps that don't need to be there, or redundant light that doesn't need to be there. We'll save money, we'll save energy, and it will be much better for our environment. And I say this coming from living in Reno for 5 years, studying light pollution. It's a great place to study light pollution because I never forget how in your face it is all the time. And Reno as a city has been doing a lot of reconstruction. They've been kind of changing a lot. They've been redesigning a lot of things in the city, trying to, you know, boost the housing market and all that. So it's actually a really good opportunity for me to kind of pitch these ideas to them, like, hey, if we can just like take down some of these casino lights, it would actually do a lot for our environment. But again, a lot of businesses and people who maybe don't care too much about the environment but have a lot of power, they might not want to take down their advertisements. They might not want to take down all these flashy lights that draw us in and all that. But and I guess streetlights too, we can't fully get rid of streetlights. So when we do need to just reduce our light instead of take it away, that can also be a really good option. And by reduce, I mean, you can change the timing of the lights. So you can take away lights during migration periods, or use motion sensors to turn lights on and off. So thinking about our own houses, having a motion sensor light that turns on when somebody comes up to your front door late at night, but otherwise isn't on. Same goes for, honestly, streetlights would be really cool if we could have motion sensor streetlights so that for those roads that nobody drives late at night, they weren't constantly illuminated. And then also reducing the intensity. So like I talked about before, clouds and snow can have really huge reflective properties that increase the brightness of our cities. So it would be great if cities would acknowledge this, and maybe on a snowy night or a cloudy day when the environment outside is just really bright, you could totally dim those lights a lot and have the same amount of illuminance, but using a lot less light, which is, again, is a way to save money and energy, but also way better than just blasting the birds every time it snows. And this is actually something I came across really recently. I found out LA was painting their streets white. Is anyone listening from LA right now that might know about this? But it actually was an initiative to reduce the heat in cities, because the black streets are causing the cities to be really hot. And the idea was that if you paint them white, the heat won't be absorbed so much, and it'll make the city cooler. And it did. It seems to be successful, but I don't know if anyone's thinking about perhaps the same effect that we're seeing with snow cover, where light pollution on a snowy day looks like 1,000 times more brighter. And I think these white streets might have the same effect. So it's kind of, again, an interesting opportunity, because I would be interested to talk to somebody about whether it'd be possible to reduce the amount of light that's used on the streets if they're white, because we might be able to see the road better and need less streetlights for safety, which would be really cool, I think, if we were able to reduce light pollution with these white streets. And if you want to read more about this, I have a link that I can share with you all, because it was news to me and I thought it was really cool. There's also a lot of programs right now, like the Lights Out program, which maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, but initiatives to change the timing of lights. So during migration periods, reduce them. There's actually, if you can tell over here, there's one in San Francisco through the Golden Gate Audubon Society, which I think is awesome. And if you go to their website, you can do things like calculate how much energy you'd save if you switched your lights, or you can take that to your bosses maybe and be like, look at how much energy I can save if we turn off our light pollution. You can actually get rebates for installing things like motion sensors and light timers. And there's a lot of just educational materials, posters and flyers that you can hang out places if you're interested in spreading the word. I think it's a really great program. And then finally, I'll just pitch that there's still a lot we don't know. I've been studying this for 5 years now, and I feel like the more I learn, the more I realize I just don't know. There's still so many birds out there that we have no idea what their visual systems are like. We don't know how they're experiencing light pollution or what effect it's having on them. And I think there are really great solutions out there just waiting to be discovered. So in the engineering side of things as well, hopefully with time, we'll come up with some really good solutions that will help us stay safe and keep our streetlights where we need them, but reduce the ecological impacts. And that's for you guys. So with that, I will open the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Valentina. That was a really wonderful talk. I hope everybody learned a lot. I know that it's such an interesting and engaging topic. It's something that we can all relate to. And so I want to start with a question that's related to your research. Someone asked if you also considered the intensity of the light that you used in addition to the temperature of it. Do you know if there are corresponding changes to the birds based on that?
Yeah, and I can go to this slide. So this was showing 3 different intensities, and there definitely is an effect of intensity. So the brighter the light, the more disruptive it is, the less the birds sleep. But for my research, I actually was interested in really, really dim light. So I'll take credit for being, I think, one of the few researchers out there in the world who study effects on birds at really dim levels. Most people use brighter intensities, and I'm using something that it's 0.3 lux, which is probably nothing to you, but it's basically the intensity of like a full moon on a clear night. So it's really, really dim. And sometimes I go in there with the birds and I'm like, are they even on? Like, I can't really tell. So with that, showing that it's having such an effect on behavior is really interesting. And I think more people should be studying this because, like I said, most birds aren't sleeping directly under a light. They're sleeping out in the forest, but there is some light pollution getting in there. Even, a mile or 2 out or more, even under a tree, they're still experiencing it at dim levels.
Yeah, really cool work. And then just an additional question to that. Someone wanted to just clarify, were you just studying the one species or was there multiple?
Yeah, so I studied zebra finches. I should have said that. They are pet birds, so we get them from a breeder. They're not wild. And so we use them as a model because they're all really similar. So it's nice to like have a bunch of birds that are really similar. They were all bred in the same way. They all grew up in the same conditions. And we use that because I can't like say for sure that the way they are responding is the same way other birds are responding. But they're a nice model to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another question that came in was, they said, my understanding is that sometimes street lighting has been installed for safety reasons. And I'm wondering if you've thought about the interaction between safety and reducing or redirecting light?
Yeah, that's a really huge topic. And it's something I would love to get more involved in. I think because it is really important. Lights are not out there all the time just to, advertise McDonald's, right? Like a lot of lights are for safety. And we can't fly planes and drive cars without street lights. But it's kind of it's a difficult thing to study because there are some studies looking at whether or not turning off lights will increase. So streetlights and planes, probably we really need the lights, right? But if you're talking about safety on like a smaller scale, so just like walking down the street at night and feeling safe, and not getting mugged and whatnot, I think that is a difficult subject because it's really hard to do an experiment where you turn off lights and then say, okay, let's have 20 people walk down the road and see who gets mugged, right? Like you can't really do that. And a lot of people are concerned for their safety and don't want to live in a city that's pitch black at night. But I think, so there have been a few studies out there, just a handful, that show that our perception of safety is relative. So if we have a person walk down a street that's super bright, and then 20 minutes later walk down a street that has a lot less light, they will feel less safe. But if you take the same person and you put them on the dim light first, and then when it's even dimmer, they don't feel more safe on the brighter light and the brighter street and the dim street, if that makes sense. So it's kind of all relative. And I think if we did holistically turn down the lights, our eyes would adjust a lot better and we would feel just as safe. And a lot of it is just that perception of being safe. And so that's something that, yeah, I think is really important to look into, because I don't want to make the world less safe for anybody. But I think we can do a lot to reduce the lights without affecting safety at all, is my opinion.
So another question, going back to when you mentioned a little bit about how there are people doing research on radar. So do you happen to know if light pollution is also a problem for bats?
Yeah, I don't personally study bats, but it is a huge problem. I have some colleagues who are studying the effects of light pollution on bats in national parks, because even just, it's like kind of dark in national parks, but even just the street lights in like the parking lots and things like that can be a big issue. And it's kind of the same as what I was talking about for owls. For things that are nocturnal, they are awake at night. So it's not changing their sleep in the same way it's changing like our sleep and diurnal birds' sleep that are trying to sleep. But for nocturnal things, they're already awake. They're using the light now to forage. So it's changing what they're eating and how much they're eating it, and where they're going, where they're spending their time, where they're roosting. And I don't know too much about this, but I think there's probably a lot of effects of light pollution in bats on like disease transfer and things like that as well, because it's causing things to group together in a way that they didn't group together before. And it's really interesting. And the people that I know working on that are specifically looking at the interaction of the bats with moths, because so bats are affected by light pollution for sure, but moths are like super affected. Like if you ever have a street light, or if you have a light outside your house, like you probably know that moths love lights. So they're very what we call phototaxic. They just are really attracted to it. And so that is probably one of the biggest ways that it's affecting our bats as well.
So we have some interesting comments too. People are saying that astronomers are also sensitive to light pollution. Absolutely. And there have also been some questions about artificial light in certain parts of the spectrum affecting plants as well.
Yeah, the effect of light pollution on plants is another thing that like I really am interested in. I feel like as somebody who studies animals, like plants are just like this fascinating other world that I know very little about, but it's having a huge effect on plants. And that kind of goes back to that like food chain effect, is that like, you know, I only talked about like birds and like fish and insects a little bit, but plants are at the bottom of that, and they're also being affected by light pollution. So there's just opportunities to disrupt things at all stages.
And then one more question just came in. I wonder what light recovery times are for owls. At night, if we are hit with a bright light, we lose vision. Could that be true for owls as well?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I don't know about recovery, like they are suggesting, where if it's just like if you flash them with a light and then take, how long does it take for their vision to come back? But I think it's definitely flashing lights in that way can probably be really disruptive for a lot of things, and definitely affect the efficiency that they find food. And I think for owls, another big thing is that their prey can now see them a lot better, right? So where they had the element of surprise, they're now hunting things that are just like, dude, I see you. Like, and that can also be a really big effect. One of my chapters that I didn't really talk about for later is looking at whether things can adjust to light. So I think Jan was asking specifically about recovery time within minutes, I guess, of seeing a light and then taking it away. But on a longer scale, I'm kind of looking at what long-term exposure to light pollution looks like and whether birds can adjust their behavior. So if initially they're losing a lot of sleep and being really disrupted, can they kind of get used to it and then kind of find normalcy in that and what that means for them down the road?
Yeah, and then one more question here. How about the use of infrared light for safety cameras? Does this interfere with birds and bats and other animals?
Yeah, bats and insects and other animals. I think it might, but I do think infrared is a really good idea. I think it's definitely a potential solution in a lot of places. I think people don't love the idea of like red light everywhere. It goes back to this idea of like safety, perception of safety. If we just used all infrared light, I think there would be some pushback from people thinking it was creepy. Cities probably wouldn't like it, unfortunately, but I think infrared light is definitely a way to save the birds because they cannot see infrared, and so it's a really good idea.
All right, I think that is the last question that I'm seeing at the moment. So first of all, I want to thank you, Valentina, for your wonderful talk and great answers to all those questions. Thank you, everybody, for sticking around and attending this talk. We really appreciate you. Valentina, is there anything else you want to say to everybody before we sign off?
I don't think so. I guess if you have other questions or later down the line you have questions, I can put maybe my contact info back up for a quick second. Please just reach out on Twitter or my email is there. And I love talking about this. I would love to get involved with any projects that people have or initiatives they want to get started, and spread the word. You know, I think it's a really easy thing to tackle because, like I said, you can just flip of a switch, turn those lights off and save yourself some money, get some better sleep. It's a win-win.